Welcome to the Bucher and Friends podcast. Here is your host.
Let's send it over to Rick Bucher.
Rick Bucher.
Welcome to another episode of Bucher Friendless, subsidiary of Bucher and Friends and part of the United WeCast network. I'm Rick Bucher. You can see me on FS1, you can read me on Bleacher Report, you can hear me on radio.com, and you can follow me on Twitter at Rick Bucher and on Instagram at Rick_Bucher. We're about 18 days out from Christmas, which meant back in the day, 17 days until I had to start my Christmas shopping. I am much better about it now. I'm happy to report I've actually bought a few items already. But one of the things I wish I could buy and give to myself is a time machine or a genie stuffer to return the NBA game to the days when the rules weren't tilted so dramatically in favor of scoring. I never thought I'd get bored with up and down play and 120 plus point games, but that's where I find myself. And by the way, I'm recording this after David Fizdale was dismissed by the New York Knicks. I'm waiting to get a little more information, and you'll find out why, because this podcast is a reflection of the value of waiting a little bit before coming out and making a pronouncement or a determination on exactly why things happened or what they mean. And that's the case with David Fizdale from everything I knew from the beginning of the season. This was not something that the Knicks front office wanted to do. Wasn't anything that they were anticipating on doing. I know there's some reports out there that he was being set up. Might be the case, but they had no intention of firing him this early. Really is my best guesstimate at this point. That it's a reflection of two 30-plus point losses, and they simply couldn't go on. There had to be some development, some belief in the coach, development by the young players, belief from the veteran players, and that's what made this necessary at this time. Also, there was a place in the schedule right before Christmas where they've got a number of easy opponents, and that would usually be the time when you make a coaching change, so the new guy comes in and demonstrates that, the team can move in a positive direction. My guesstimate there is they simply didn't want to wait until right before Christmas. That if they were going to do it, they thought, let's do it now rather than the untoward insult upon injury move of firing somebody on Christmas Eve or they're nearby. All right. So anyway, back to the case at hand. There is more offense than there has been in certainly the last couple of years, and certainly this year. I mean, we're seeing 150-point games. We're seeing teams routinely break 120. Betting the over would be the smart way to go by and large, and that was the case last year, certainly early on. And look, I don't think I'm alone either on this not finding it all that attractive based on the TV ratings for the primary broadcast partners and the complaints that I see on social media. And look, I know the vast majority of everything on social media is complaining about one thing or another, but still, the games are just not that compelling. And one reason is that all that scoring has produced notably more lopsided winning margins than any time in the last few years, and the style of play has become patently predictable and uniform by teams across the league. When it comes to the margin, last season, only 5 teams finished. I'm going to get a little analytical with you, and I generally don't do this, but sometimes it serves a purpose, especially when it comes to team comparisons and league-wide assessments. So last season, only 5 teams finished with a plus scoring margin above 4 points. It was Milwaukee, Toronto, Golden State, Houston, and Utah. This year so far, there are 11 that have a plus margin of 4 or more. And 2 years ago, there were only 4. Same for the year before that. So there's a decided jump from the last few years to where we are right now. And again, understand it's early in the season. that may even out. But the bottom line is, if there's a reason why the game doesn't seem as entertaining per usual, it's because the games are not competitive or as competitive as we're used to seeing them. And here's the other part about the uniform. Does it feel, or the uniform style of play, does it feel to you as if more threes are being launched by everyone? It's not a feel. It's real. Last year, 13 teams got 30% or more of their scoring from three-pointers. 13. This year, 20 of them. And Memphis, the team that played slow and didn't shoot threes, is sitting at 29.9, and OKC is at 29.8. So you darn near 22 teams are getting nearly a third of their scoring from three-point shooting. Now, for comparison, 3 seasons ago, there were only 6 teams getting 30% or more of their points off threes, and 5 years ago, there were just 2, the Warriors and the Rockets. So maybe we know who to blame for this trend. But this is what bothers me most about the rules, because it's not just style of play. The style of play is because they're taking advantage of how the game is being officiated and how the rules are being interpreted. The rules, as they're being interpreted, discourage team play. As much as we might not like the way James Harden plays, the fact of the matter is, it works. And so why not? There's no reason to pass or cut or do anything creative collectively, because one player who can handle the ball and shoot is either going to get off a three-pointer, get fouled, or get to the rim the vast majority of the time. Go back to the days of Vince Lombardi, who wasn't big on the forward pass. And it's because there was too much of a chance of an interception. You know, two of 3 things could happen that weren't good in an instance. It's incomplete or it gets intercepted. And same goes with passing now in the NBA. Chance of a turnover, chance of it being passed to somebody who can't shoot and or is not as good a shooter and a shot is not created. So why not just put it in the hands of your best player and let him go to work? The game and the rules encourage that style of play. And we're seeing it by and large. Look, the Harden and the Rockets are an extreme example of it. But it's not as if we're not seeing it in different forms from every single team, Spurs included. I watched the end of the Spurs-Kings game and basically put it in DeMar DeRozan's hands time after time after time. Might set a screen, hope to get a switch, but once you got the switch, now it's one-on-one. Let that guy attack, see where he can go. So there's no reason to pass. There's no reason to cut. There's no reason to do anything collectively creative because, as I said, one player can do it all. And some of the rules that are creating that situation is that they've clearly loosened the rules on screen setting. Now that it forces a defender to trail a shooter rather than get over that stationary screen early. You can't, because the big can move. I don't know. I don't, and I haven't. I probably should. I should talk to some officials because I have the access to talk to referees and find out what it is. Where do they draw the line on illegal screens? Because they do call illegal screens now and then. But man, the amount of movement that you have to do to get that whistle is, let's just say, it's very liberal. So. The vast majority of them look illegal to me. And based on how they're called at the high school and collegiate levels, it's completely different. And I don't know if there's not a whole lot of screen setting in AAU from what I've seen, so I can't compare how it's called there. Now, since the defender has to trail, the offensive player can suddenly stop, and that trail defender, if he's not careful, is going to run into him, foul. If he doesn't, the offensive player can contort his body to make sure that the defender does, or he stops, starts again, and now is left his defender trying to guard him from behind, forcing the defensive big man to guard two men, both of which are headed for the rim. If another defender comes over, that means somebody's open for a three. You get the picture. So, and getting to the rim never has been easier since you now have 3 full steps to get there. The Euro step was already an expansion of the traveling rules. Maybe people forget this, but it was. The Euro step, 15 or so years ago, introduced by the Manu Ginobilis. That's who I think of most when I think of the Euro step. That gave offensive players a full 2 steps. Now, people will say the NBA long had 2 steps, and I would say yes on breakaways, on certain situations, but not in a move to get past a guy. Like, they'd give it to you to finish a play, but not necessarily to get by somebody. Now you got the two steps to set up a shot. You got it everywhere, basically. And so it was, prior to that, it was 1.5 steps. It was gather step, and then another step, and you finish. And that's still basically how it's called, certainly at the high school level. And this is where this becomes difficult, because you have players who watch the NBA all the time, want to replicate what their favorite players do. Well, now the games are becoming so disparate, I don't know that you can really afford to do that as a young player. You might get away with it in AAU, but it's going to kill the high school game and puts the collegiate game in a difficult position. But here, look, the reality is now it's 2 steps and a very loosely defined gather step. Essentially 3 steps. The different interpretations of what a gather step that I've seen online or through social media by the official NBA referees feed indicates that there's a very liberal interpretation of what a gather step is. Basically, anything after as the ball's coming up, you can take a step anywhere in there, and that's the gather step. Now you add the youngest stable of refs the NBA has had in a long time, and a mandate seemingly to call every infraction, whether it impacts play or creates an advantage or not, and it has turned the game into what James Harden has perfected. How do I make it impossible for you to guard me? Not because I'm going by you, but because you either have to give me space or I can force you to make contact with me. It's a heightened version of fool the referee, which guys have been playing in the NBA or doing in the NBA for decades. Only difference now is the referees are in on it. They are mandated to be fooled into blowing the whistle, even when a guy hasn't really created a shot being thwarted by excessive physical force. That's what it's come down to. These jumpers leaning forward, contorting their bodies. It's not a natural jumping, shooting motion. And yet, referees have been told that they have to make that call. And I think it all generated from giving the landing space for a jumper, but it's gotten way out of control. And that to me is not the elegance of the game. It's not the beauty of the game. The beauty of the game is in players playing together, creating opportunities, having to do that to beat the other side, the other group of players who are working in tandem to stop that flow, that chemistry. Now, there's a simple way to resolve all this, as I see it. Take away the extra step. Let's go back to 2 steps. I'll give you the Euro. I don't think that's going anywhere, and it's kind of a cool move, so we'll stay with it. Don't allow screens to move. And stop blowing the whistle when an offensive player jumps into a defensive player, wherever they might be on the floor. It will force teams, once again, to move players and the ball to create shots, which I don't think I'm alone here, is what we all love most about the game, right? The magic of 5 guys working together to create what an individual can't. Or I should say couldn't, because now the individual can. Which now makes the other 4 guys almost superfluous at any given time. And superfluous is another word for dead weight, extraneous baggage. And those aren't words you want used at any time when it comes to a game or entertainment, certainly not in a team sport. All right, next topic. It's actually, when I originally planned to talk about this, I had a different view. And over the last 24 hours, I've come to understand by hearing more, I've gotten a better context on this. And it might be smart of me perhaps to steer clear of this entirely, but I just feel as if we've become so scared of talking about things and understandably. I mean, and I'm talking about the incident with Tim Ryan. He's a former NFL player turned broadcaster who was suspended from his duties with the 49ers TV broadcast team for a comment he made on the team's flagship radio station, KNBR. Ryan suggested that between the Ravens' black uniforms, quarterback Lamar Jackson's black skin, and the dark pigment of the football, it was difficult for the 49ers defensive players to see the ball in his run-pass option plays. And I will say, initially, when all the outrage and I was at a loss. The difficulty I had is that no one specifically outlined what it was that Ryan did, other than he included Jackson's skin color in an observation. And immediately, I'm sure there's people out there who, see, you can't do that. You can't do that. And I just feel, yeah, you can if it's depending on the context. He's not. Anyway, the NAACP president in the Bay Area suggested that Ryan should make a public apology. And I don't want to take that request lightly, coming from the NAACP president. But he didn't say exactly what Ryan should apologize for. And I listened to a couple of TV anchors, local TV anchors. I'm here in the Bay Area, and they were discussing it, and they labeled Ryan's remarks as obviously dumb, air quotes, their words, and said something about you just have to be smart enough not to go there. And I get that we are equal parts more sensitive and aware, thankfully so, than we've ever been. But I still needed to know exactly what was inappropriate about what Ryan said. If for no other reason, then it gives me a better chance of not inadvertently offending someone with an observation or making a similar mistake. And I get what slippery ground that is for almost any situation when we talk about skin color. But again, have we lost all sense of context? Was he saying anything derogatory? That was my question. Was he saying anything that was clearly untrue or a misrepresentation? The 49ers defensive back, Richard Sherman, who's black, when asked about the remarks, said he wasn't offended, which doesn't mean Ryan didn't say something offensive, because just because someone of color doesn't find it offensive, we're all different, we all have different viewpoints, doesn't mean that it wasn't offensive to the majority of black people or people of color. But Sherman also said that he and the other defensive players had a hard time picking up the ball when Jackson had it. So that's presumably for the reasons that Ryan noted. And look, I absolutely abhor whataboutism. But I have to ask, if a black batter in baseball said he had trouble picking up the ball thrown by a white pitcher with particularly white, translucent skin, and he was wearing a white uniform, would we be alarmed? Would we be suggesting that was a racist remark? Now, what I've come to understand, or what I believe, is this immediately was because people weren't talking about it, or they were afraid to talk about it, or they didn't want to really go there, as the TV anchor said. is that the remark very well may have been taken as insulting. Not racist insulting or derogatory, but insulting to Jackson nonetheless. The suggestion being that the reason that he's so successful is because you can't see the ball very well. Not really have to do about his skin as much as the combination of those things is why he's so difficult to stop. And I would say, yes, I agree. That is insulting for what Lamar Jackson is doing, redefining the quarterback position. Again, in the NFL, much like we're seeing in the NBA, we had Doug Flutie just saying, hey, if I was playing now, I'd be killing it. And I think Steve Young, any running quarterback, any quarterback, white or black, who had the don't run beaten out of them, sometimes figuratively by their coaching staff, sometimes literally by defensive players who were allowed to pound them anytime they ran the ball, unlike today. Yeah, I think the rules, much like the NBA, have skewed what the skill set is for particular positions. I mean, we have the debate over James Harden. Is he a point guard or a shooting guard? He's basically both. Doesn't have to be the pass. It doesn't have to be a traditional point guard, but he does have the ball in his hands, starts the plays, often finishes them, does all of it without anybody else touching the ball. So it's one and the same. We're seeing everything skewed toward offense because offense sells. It's still the line. Defense may win championships. Offense sells. So now it's a matter of got to have offense, and then you try to find a way to play defense as well as you can within the particular rules. So this is how my evolution on the Tim Ryan thing is. Like, yeah, you know what? Probably a little. I don't know that he intended it to be diminishing or demeaning Lamar Jackson's overall abilities. But I can see where somebody would look at that and say, especially if you were with the Ravens, you'd look at it and say, hey, our dude's legit good. It's got nothing to do about being able to, having difficulty picking up the ball. He's fast. He can throw it better than anybody thought. And I will tell you, he reads situations better than I thought. And you can't clock him. He's very good at avoiding hits and seeing the field and all of that. And he's very agile. Give him all of that for why he can run the way he can with impunity. But the rules also allow it. You got to be careful in how you tackle a guy. And if a quarterback even looks like he's going to begin to slide, you got to let him slide, which allows him a little maneuverability in terms of maybe adding a few yards here and there. It just makes it incredibly difficult for defenders as I see it. All right, so now, big picture, my sensitivity to how we handle this remark by Tim Ryan is, my sensitivity may be greater than it would be otherwise, because I went through something similar with a story that I just wrote. It was about the Warriors opponents looking forward to playing Steph Curry and Draymond Green without quite as much talent around them. And I started off the story with the line, payback, as they say, is a bitch, but so is not getting the chance at it. Now, our copy desk took exception to the use of the word bitch. Not because it's poor language, but because it is sometimes used as a derogatory term toward women. And listen, to be fair, our copy desk has saved me from a couple of factual errors that would have been embarrassing. And I truly appreciate that BR has a copy desk and that they are as attentive as they are. I wish I got to talk to them instead of my editor having to make my case for me. But maybe it's better that we don't. Maybe there's a go-between. But my problem with this was it wasn't a factual issue. It was a social or cultural one, and I believe one that is social or cultural not in our advancement of being more aware of inappropriate terms as much as our fear of backlash for what somebody out there might interpret as being derogatory. So I made the case that the word bitch was in no way being used as a term in reference to women in this case, nor is it that in the phrase is it considered. That's why the word is there. And it wasn't really clear how anyone could even construe that it was being used in that context in this story. So why were we attaching that meaning to it? Why were we creating policy for a word and a phrase that did not previously exist, policy that is, out of apprehension that somehow, some way, someone in the world would attach their own connotation to the word and then come after us for being misogynistic or whatever as a result of their interpretation? Now, I lost the fight. I had to change it to payback is you know the saying, or something to that effect. And considering some of the other language that we do print, it sounded oddly quaint, but what the hell? It still got the point across. And my story was fine. And I'll live to write again and send it to my copy desk. And I'm sure it won't be the last time we have a disagreement. And I'm sure there will be plenty of times where they save me from myself. And by the way, apologies to anyone who was offended by my use of hell just now. All right. That does it for this episode of Bucher Friendless, subsidiary of Bucher and Friends, part of the United WeCast network. If you enjoy the show, or even if you don't, please rate and review us on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts. And if you want us to do something for you, send a screenshot of that rating or review, and you will be eligible to win a autographed copy of Derrick Rose's new biography that he's written with Sam Smith, or the biography that I wrote with Yao Ming, A Life in Two Worlds. Will give you some insight into the challenges that the NBA has trying to branch into other cultures, both attract their players and their talent, but also enter their consumer bases when those countries don't necessarily play by the same rules that we do, whether it's socially or in business. All right. That does it. In the next podcast, I'll be joined by Ryan Hollins, and we will get into, hopefully by then, we will be able to get into David Fizdale being fired by the Knicks, where they go from here, and what it means for a team when you have a coach fired at this point in the season. How does a team recoup? What does it mean for the players? How do the players take it and approach it in the locker room? Ryan will give us insight into all that, and I will effort to give you some more insight into exactly why this happened, when it happened, and where the Knicks go from here, and is anybody else on their way out the door. All right, that does it. As always,